Hello, and welcome to our Managing the Mental Health and Wellbeing of Lawyers webinar for March. I think it's March still. We try to run one of these every month. So welcome, and it's great to have you here. It does feel as though perhaps it's even more important this month with various things, obviously, that have been in the news, etc. So yes, I think more important than ever that we have this conversation. So I'm going to go through and share some slides with you, share some thoughts. If you are able to join us in the chat box at all, when I sort of throw out some questions to you, please do feel free to interact. And follow up with any questions either on here in the chat box or obviously afterwards as well. So let's get going. I mean, my question first of all is for you to have a think about what is your greatest challenge at the moment as someone potentially leading, managing people. Perhaps you're in HR. You're somehow involved in managing the mental health and well-being of others at the moment, and thinking about what your biggest challenge is at the moment. Obviously, there's lots of different things. I think for most people, it tends to boil down to I'm not quite sure what the right thing to do is potentially. How much should I get involved? How much is too much? When do we overstep a line? And even if I want to get involved, what is it that we should and ought to be doing? Those seem to sort of be the biggest challenges. I guess for me, in the whole conversation of mental health and well-being of the legal profession, the biggest challenge is the legal profession itself. Our own mindsets, our own traits, the things that bring us into law in the first place and have us sort of successful at interview and successful at promotion and all those sorts of things, those traits are exactly the things that are detrimental to our mental health and well-being, which means that with the best will in the world, with all the ideas that might be out there to help lawyers with their mental health and well-being, if we don't deal with the fundamental traits and the fundamental mindsets, those things are not really going to make a big difference. So I think for me, as a legal professional and someone trying to help lawyers with these issues, that to me is the biggest challenge, that if we don't start tackling that, the rest is just a nice to have in a lot of ways. It might make some small difference around the edge, but it's never going to make a really big difference. So for you, sort of watching this or catching up with the recording, your challenge might be one of these things. It might be that, this is a really important topic. I really want to look after the people that I'm responsible for, either now or perhaps if you're training or on your way to that, that you're going to be responsible for, but you're too busy. There's too much on your plate. There's a lot of demands on your time. I know if you are in HR or people management, head of people, all those sorts of things, that there's so much to do, whether it's disciplinaries, whether it's appraisals, whether it's whatever it is, there's all these different things to do. Recruitment and sort of dealing with mental health and well-being is an additional thing as well. So there's so many demands on time, and particularly for a thorny and a difficult issue, it's how do I actually make time to learn what I need to learn and understand what I need to understand to actually be effective and to do the right things. Another problem can be that, maybe there is no challenge. Our teams are really strong. They don't need any help, or maybe they have a perception that they don't need any help. Maybe deep down you think actually they do need some support. And I do work with some places where there are team leaders, heads of department, sometimes equity partners, and they find it difficult to challenge those people, even if there is an issue perhaps within the teams and perhaps that person isn't approachable, isn't looking after their team in the way that perhaps other people are. So that can be a challenge as well sometimes, is how do you have those difficult conversations where perhaps you've got some teams that are looked after fantastically because their team leader, line manager is brilliant at it and is brilliant at the difficult conversations, and other people who almost refuse to have them. and yet are responsible for people as well. There can be that problem. Your challenge might sound like, I'd love to get involved in this. It's important. I really want to do it, but I don't know where to start. And often I hear from people that they're worried about overstepping the boundaries. You know, what is the right thing to do? What is too much? How do I not get too involved? That can be a problem. Or, you know, number four, which ends up on any of these lists, regardless of what I'm talking about, is, do you know what? I'm just exhausted. I've got a lot going on. I can't really think about this. I can't really give it the mental attention and the energy that it might need, to actually come up with something useful and suitable. So if we haven't met before, lovely to meet you. My name's Hannah Beko. I am a still practicing commercial property lawyer. I've done that for about 17 years. I don't tend to do a lot of it anymore, because training and coaching and writing about and researching and getting involved in this topic is really I'd say my favorite thing to do, and it is my favorite thing to do, but it's more than that. It's I can't sleep at night if I'm not doing it. That's that's how bad it is. I realized that in lockdown, when all of my training was cancelled and everything stopped in lockdown, I literally couldn't sleep. And when I realized why, it's because I want and need to help people, because I know there is so much pain and it is so difficult out there, and I have some answers. I've worked on them for years, and you know, not just for myself personally, but thousands of other people in the legal profession as well, and a need to help people. I also am a mum of three boys. I'm a certified coach and trainer, and actually still very much learning. I'm very excited about a new trauma-informed program that I am starting soon, because so many lawyers and legal professionals that I work with have trauma as well. You know, it's there's trauma around past bullying, harassment, past toxic cultures they might have worked in, and that's outside of anything they might even bring in from home. You know, grief, infertility journeys, all those sorts of things are trauma and present as trauma. So that is very much something that I have wanted to work on and include in my work, whereas before I've had to sort of refer people elsewhere to counsellors and that sort of thing. That is definitely a next step, I think, because that's really important. There are very few lawyers I speak to who don't have some sort of trauma going on from sort of their history so far, which is sad, but is true. So what I want to talk about in this brief webinar today, which is really just an introduction, is to share some ideas, maybe to get you thinking about things that perhaps you haven't thought about before, where I share how I sort of use this in practice with different firms and different teams. So why it's important, what is the importance of the mental health in the workplace? I think that's probably obvious, but it's useful to remember why. Identifying common issues that we are seeing, what are effective strategies that we could consider and we could use. You know, maybe you think about your current strategies and some little pieces that you might want to change or bring in to that. And obviously, you know, if anybody does have any comments or any questions, whether it's now or afterwards, then do share those, because it's always good to know what's working in other places as well. So this image here is meant to symbolize this sort of new horizon. And yeah, it is a bit of a new world. Mental health and well-being, of course, has been talked about a lot since the pandemic. It wasn't a lot since then, before then. But now I think it's moved on a step further, whether it's temporary or permanent, I don't know, but it has moved on a step forward with obviously all the recent discussion in the news again about mental health and well-being, and why it's not just a nice to have, it's really important. I think we've talked about it as a nice to have for a long time. Whereas actually now we're seeing it's life and death. It's important. It's more than just because it's the right thing to do. It's more important even than that, I think. So here we go. More than a nice to have. Obviously, there's Law Care's report that came out in 2021 with some really stark statistics. At least sort of 60% of legal professionals are on the burnout scale, which is in a lot of ways not surprising. I had predicted it all the way through the pandemic, and in the years afterwards, because I think there's a lag time. There's the pandemic and all the time people spent working at home, which might have worked for people for a period of time, but a very long period of stress and that sort of thing, it leads to burnout probably a bit further down the line. So I think we're almost starting to see the results of that now. I always say it's a bit like when we sort of keep working up to a holiday, and then when we go on holiday, we get ill because suddenly the adrenaline goes down and the body's defenses are down, and then we get ill. And burnout's a lot like that. We can keep going, and then when, oh right, the pandemic's over, we're back at work, things are getting back to normal, is when sometimes some of these things come and hit us. There are obviously unique challenges, I think, for male lawyers, as we probably see in all sorts of different professions. There tends to be a likelihood that women will talk about these issues a little bit more, and maybe, and I say maybe, feel more able to go and ask for help, whether it's from their GP, whether it's from an EAP counselling service or something like that. That's not to say that they do feel comfortable doing it. A lot of them don't, but generally speaking, women might feel more comfortable to do that than men, and women might feel more comfortable to talk about it with other women in a safe environment, whereas it can be harder for men. So there is that unique problem, obviously, with male lawyers as well. And then, of course, there's the SRA in May 2023, who issued their guidance and their codes of conduct. So there is an obligation not just on firms, but on solicitors who are regulated by the SRA, which is, all of us regulated solicitors, including the team leaders, the managers, the heads of departments. But arguably, all of us who are qualified lawyers are subject to the SRA. So we are subject, in my opinion, to these obligations, to treat colleagues fairly and with respect, to look out for these mental health issues, and particularly with things like there's the bullying and harassment, and to call these things out potentially. So that means, yes, the individual leaders and managers do, but I also suspect that if you're working in a team and you see that these issues are going on, there is potentially going to be an argument that you need to talk to the SRA about that, as we would if we see any other things that we need to report. The one that springs to mind is, when people at junior lawyers are asked to sign things and witness things that they didn't witness, and all those sorts of things, and then they're under an obligation to report that. And I think it's those sorts of things. If you're regulated by the SRA, then we have to think about whether we're under an obligation to report some of this. So although I'm skeptical about why the SRA got involved, I think it's probably a good thing that they did, because I think hopefully this will start to change the culture from where people thought it was okay to perhaps treat people like this, to understand that the profession is moving to a place where it's not going to be okay. And obviously, the last point here is our junior staff need to be able to raise issues as well, not just juniors, the seniors, the partners, the team leaders, all of those people need to be able to feel that they can raise issues without it having a negative impact on their career or their pay rise or how they're thought about within the firm. That's the culture shift that we need to see, and hopefully the SRA's piece is a little piece of that. Why were the SRA interested? Well, obviously, they're concerned that if people are suffering from mental health or wellbeing issues, that they then aren't providing such a good service to the public, so the service to the clients declines, but also then they can't pursue them for issues and mistakes, because as we've seen, well, they do still pursue them, but often the response is, but I was suffering from mental health or stress. Now, I'm not saying that they weren't. They probably were, because by the time you are making a mistake like that, and then the problem, as we all know, is covering it up. It's not the mistake, it's they're trying to cover it up. It's not necessarily telling the truth about it, all of those sorts of things. To my mind, you're probably suffering with stress and or mental health issues by the time you get into that position, because that is a horrible position to be in. So this is why the SRA got interested. They want to be able to protect the service to the public, and they want to be able to pursue lawyers if there's an issue, without them being able to say, sorry, yes, I made a mistake, but it's because I was under significant pressure. It's because I was under so much stress, etc. Um, it almost, to me, doesn't matter why the SRA got involved. I think the fact they have, hopefully, is going to be a positive, and hopefully is going to very slowly lead out that culture change and the reason why it needs to be thought about differently. Because I think in the past, it's just been a case of, okay, we're going to have a mini training, or we're going to have our fruit bowl, or we're going to have our yoga, or whatever. And actually, it's got to now be a fundamental part, I think, of how teams are run, how firms are run, consideration of culture, consideration of hierarchy, and how people are promoted, and all of those sorts of things. It probably needs to be weaved into all of that. So why does it matter? Why is the mental health of our people important? Yeah, of course, there's a human element. There's that it's the right thing to do. Of course it is. And I think it can't be understated. People talk about mental health and well-being as like an aside to everything else that the firm might be doing. But if you think about it, the lawyers providing the service to the clients, which then produces the income, produces the profits. The business exists to provide the service to the clients. The lawyers are the ones providing that service. If they are not operating in a way that is healthy and sustainable and with good mental health, then they're not providing a good service, and the business is not going to be profitable. So it's absolutely fundamental. It's not just nice to have. They are the people providing the service. They need to be, in the best health and condition that they can be to provide that service. Impact on the rest of the team, and this is where it really starts to cost money. If one person is not performing as they normally would, or is perhaps off sick with stress, then obviously that falls to the rest of the team to pick up that slack, which then means that potentially other people then go down with stress, or not as effective as they could be. And I've seen that so many times. We have one person go off sick with stress, and their immediate line manager then picks up the additional work. 6 months later, that person is off with stress. So it's a knock-on effect. It's what one of my collaboration partners calls the wellbeing black hole. We think it just relates to the one person who might be struggling with their mental health. But no, it ripples out to the rest of the team, and can take multiple people down potentially. Obviously, there's a long-term reduction in those individuals' output, their quality of work, and the damage to the client relationships. If people keep coming in and out of relationships, that's damaging as well. And then, yeah, the actual sort of obvious costs are the costs of sick pay, and recruitment if we need to replace those people. Reputational costs, this is starting to become more and more of an issue, as people who are moving firms do ask about, well, what is your mental health and wellbeing policy? What is your, what is work-life balance like? What is culture like? And people will move for culture. If they work under a team or a team leader who is not supportive, and even, and it might not be that individual that might be suffering with mental health potentially, but if they see someone else in their team who is, but they are not being looked after and not being treated well, then even that can be a red flag to them to start thinking about moving on. So obviously the costs are significant if we don't sort of deal with this issue properly. How do we identify a problem in the first place? Well, it's interesting because I almost feel as though in a lot of ways we don't need to identify a problem. The problem already exists, and as I said, that's in the mindset of lawyers. So even if we have, let's take a team, think about a team, maybe everyone is healthy, happy, loves their work. I think about when I was a baby lawyer many years ago. We were a young team. We would all happily work the long hours. We didn't have families to get back to. When we were on a big deal, we'd get some pizzas into the office. It was all fun and all in it together, as it were. Even if there's no problem at that point, there will be in the future, because my belief is nobody can get through this career without some issues, because even if it's not specifically work related, things happen to them in their personal life. They'll go through grief, they'll go through health issues themselves, or family members will, loved ones will. They will go through issues, and it is not a case of those issues stay at home and we don't bring them into work. Whatever is going on for us in our personal life seeps into work, and similarly any issues at work seep into our personal life. So at some point every single person will be impacted by stress, pressure, fall in their mental health and their well-being and those sorts of things. So I think it's probably safe to say that we don't need to identify a specific problem. It's already there. The problem being that lawyers are not good at taking care of themselves. They're not good at understanding when they need a break, to have boundaries. They are highly driven, highly high achievers, and actually stopping them is hard, and that's part of the culture, and that's part of the problem. I think that's the biggest problem. But how might we identify problems with specific individuals? I thought these images might break the tension a little bit. So being snappy, that might be one of the first signs. Now, by the time we get to any of these signs, people really do have a problem. I say the industry problem is our traits and all the things that make us good lawyers also make us susceptible to mental health challenges. But taking that aside, when do we see that there's actually something that really, really needs to be intervened with? So snapping at people, not being as patient, not being able to sort of act in the way that they normally would, happy, friendly, all of those sorts of things would be a red flag that there is something that somebody needs to have a discussion with them about, which would normally be their line manager, the person who supervises them, that sort of thing. I know often people think that it might be HR that should have these conversations. In an ideal world, our team leaders, our managers, those people who are directly responsible for that person would have the training and support to be able to have these conversations with their people, to find out what is it. You're not your normal self. Something seems different. What is it that's going on? So having less patience and being snappy would be one of them. Commenting that they're already tired, always tired, would be another one. If someone, regardless of the day of the week or the time, is always tired, then that would be an issue, a sign that there's potentially something going on. It could be a physical illness, even, that there's something that is stopping them from having enough sleep and they're constantly tired. That is going to be a problem. If they are unable to sort of see the wood for the trees, I guess is how I would explain this one. If they are sort of very just very focused on what's in front of them, unable to see the bigger picture, that is often a symptom of chronic stress. They are sort of in tunnel vision. I'm just dealing with this. I can only focus on this. This is the only thing I can do. I don't see the bigger picture, which is, the rest of my team, the rest of my career. I'm just focused on this one particular thing. So that sort of continuous tunnel vision and not being able to see a bigger picture is often a symptom of stress, because with that stress reaction, we can only focus on that one thing at a time. We can't stop to see the bigger picture. And that's why it becomes such a trap, because once we're in that trap, we tend to stay in it, and it gets worse and worse and worse, because how do we see the bigger picture? If we could still see the bigger picture, we'd perhaps be getting more sleep, taking more breaks, doing all the things that logically, we're clever people, we need to do. But for some reason, we're not acting logically. And it's because we've got stuck into this sort of chronic stress, tunnel vision type approach. So it's very important for other team members, team leaders, heads of department, etc., who are responsible for people, to look out for that as a symptom potentially. Then we've got, I guess, is what is the more common ones, the more obvious ones. Yes, they're physical symptoms. It could be headaches, backache, neck aches, stomach aches, recurring stomach problems. All those sorts of things is often what people would go to their GP about. But actually, in a vast majority of cases, it can be stress related. So if people are reporting these physical symptoms, of course, the GP and things need to check that there isn't a physical reason behind it. But once they have exhausted that, then they will often come down to the fact that it's a stress response and it's impacting the body. So that if you are, for example, getting sick notes, or people are reporting that they are absent because of things like headaches, stomach problems, those sorts of things, then really there should be a flag go up that there is potentially a mental health issue behind that physical problem, rather than just assume it's a physical problem that will be resolved, they'll be back at work like nothing happened, and everything will get back to normal. It's probably not going to be the case. If people's performance changes, if their performance dips, then obviously we want to be asking questions. Why are you not performing the way you normally would? Get on with it, buck your ideas up and get back to what you were. But in a sort of more kindly, you would normally approach things in this way, and we haven't seen you in so many meetings. We haven't seen you get so involved as you normally would. Where you'd normally be leading the way on this, you aren't. What's happening? What's going on? It's those sorts of conversations. So if we've identified problems with people, then we need to know sort of what do we do next? What is the strategy? What is the plan? And to my mind, again, this is where the SRA potentially come into it, because if they come knocking on our doors as a firm and say, show us what you've been doing, what are we going to pull out? What is our strategy? And I don't think things like we have a webinar once a quarter, or we have an intranet that's got a recorded training that they can go and have a look. I don't think that's going to be enough. I hope they say that's not enough, because it's not, in my view. So what can we do? How can we actually demonstrate to the SRA, if they were to come knocking, or potentially our indemnity insurers, if someone does make a mistake and we need to put a claim through, and they say, well, what were you doing to stop this happening? If we know mistakes are usually caused by stress, what were you doing to stop this from happening? And I think that will be an interesting piece of the puzzle when insurers really, really get hold of it as well. So these are some things we could actually do and document to show what we've been doing. So watching the figures. Watch the figures of our people. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean things like their billing, their utilization, their recorded hours. Some places might have clocking in, clocking out hours, all of those sorts of things. And what are we watching for? We're watching for changes in their usual behavior. So someone might be a really high biller and always be a high biller. So in itself, that might not be a flag. Obviously, if that starts to drop, that would be a flag. What's happening? What's going on? If they are a high biller and they're always a high biller, I would still want to have a conversation, because I would want to talk to them about boundaries, because if they're one of my great people, I'd want to make sure that they are not burning out, because people can continue to perform at a high level for a period of time, but probably not forever. Certainly not when life events do start to get thrown into the mix as well. Loss of a parent, issues at home, whatever it might be. So we even are consistently high billers, I would be saying keep an eye on those too. But any changes in those figures, so any drop, utilization, particularly any increase in utilization. If there's a massive increase in utilization, what's going on? Someone is suddenly very busy, a lot busier than perhaps they were before. How are they coping? How are they finding it? All those sorts of things. I'm always amazed with one place I know that where someone was off for about 6 months with stress, and then they came back and they were down at 200% utilized. And I'm thinking, where was anybody asking questions about that? Someone has just come back from being off sick leave. They should not be 200% utilized, because that's just a fast track way to going back to being off again. So the answers are in those figures. So keeping an eye on those, knowing our people well, knowing what's normal for them, knowing what's not normal for them is really important. And the check-ins. So we can watch the figures. Then we can have the regular check-ins. Now, regular is different for different teams. If it's a junior person with a supervisor, maybe they have a check-in weekly. Ideally, most people would have a check-in monthly, in an ideal world. I know some people run teams of 40 plus people, so that's difficult. Maybe they have a deputy, maybe they share check-ins between them. You certainly want one at least once a quarter. I mean, that's pushing it. A lot of damage can happen to people in 3 months. So ideally monthly, maybe bi-monthly if you need to, but some sort of system for a mental health check-in. It's not just, how are you getting on with your files, although even that can shed light to any issues that they're dealing with, but it is a real sit down. How actually are you? And, we all know they'll never say anything the first time, you've got to ask a second time, and all those sorts of things. And then comes training and support. So sometimes we think, let's just throw the training and support in, throw the webinars in, throw all those things in. But actually, for me, that's almost the last thing. We want our teams managing our people and looking after them and looking out for them. And then, yes, there's training and support, maybe for those team leaders, so that they understand what they're looking for and how to handle it and feel more confident in having those conversations, in handling it. Then the training and support looks like training both for the managers in dealing with it and also the individuals, because at the end of the day, mental health and wellbeing is 50% the individual's responsibility and 50% the organisation's responsibility, I always think. But what that training and support needs to have, and I hope we will see more of it in the future, is not just telling them what they need to do. It's all well and good to tell them things like have some boundaries, take lunch break, drink water, eat healthy food, get some exercise. That's lovely. They know that already. They're clever, bright people. Something stops them from doing it. And it's that mindset training that they really need, that thinking about why don't I do it? What is it in me that stops me from doing it? And there'll be personal drivers. There'll be the whole, it's not a valuable use of my time unless I'm billing or doing something useful for the firm. Resting and meditating is not a useful use of my time. It takes years to battle that sort of belief, and change that mindset. But also, there's what they see. If they see their managers and their team leaders sitting through their lunch break, not going to the meditation workshop or the whatever workshop, then they won't go either. So it's very much that mixture of culture. What are their role models doing? What are their managers doing? And then working on what they need to think about individually as to what stops them from thinking about looking after themselves and how we can start to change that. That's the piece that we need to think about with training and support. Obviously, there's the firm EAP programs. There's counselling, coaching, all those sorts of things. Now, often those are in place for many firms, but nobody reminds anybody about them. When I train some team leaders, that's very much a part of the training is, look, this is what you already have. Your HR department, your whoever arranged all this for you. When you're talking to your team, you're a signposter. You're not their counselor or their therapist. You will listen to the extent you get to the bottom of the problem to see how you can help. But then you remind them of the services that they already have access to. You remind them about them, but you do it in a way that makes it acceptable for them to go and access them. That's why I always say to people, you go and call them first. Before you tell your people to call the EAP services, you call them. So when you talk to your people, you can say, oh, they're really helpful. I've called them. They answer the call in about 2 or 3 minutes. They'll triage you and then they'll send you. And, you can have up to 6 weeks of counselling. Make this normal. Those are the conversations that we need to have, because then if people think it's okay and acceptable to go to those EAP services, then they will. Otherwise, I think we're paying for a lot of money for EAP services that are not being used, because either they forget they're there or they feel there is some sort of stigma or judgment in using them. So they're not being used. And that's a really sad thing, I think, because there's some great things out there. I spoke to some firms last week who've got, I think it's something like at least 6 or 8 coaching or therapy sessions available a year per employee and their family members. This is great support. Who doesn't need that? Like, we could all do with that. It would be useful for all of us. So just for people to know what's out there for them and to not feel any stigma or judgment in accessing it would really sort of make a huge change, I think. So there we go. I think I've covered most of those in terms of what we're going to watch figures wise. Yes, of course, we're going to look at sickness and absence days and what's being reported on that sick note. Are they still coming to social events, whether they're online or not? Are they getting involved in things? Are they coming into the office? All of those things we want to have an eye on and pick up when there's a change. Any change in their normal characteristic behaviour, I always say, is a symptom of stress. If they start reversing into stationary objects or getting speeding tickets or something like that, any changes like that tend to be stress related. So team leaders, again, a vital part of this process, whether they are natural people, and I know some people will very happily have conversations with their team about how they are. Some people find this harder, but they can still be trained. They can still do it. I've seen some people who think they can't end up being excellent at this. They do it in their own way. They're authentic about it. It's not a learnt script. It's about finding a way to genuinely get through to people so that they feel they can be honest and open with them. I've put a link there to the HSE Management Standards Indicator tool, and I think I've got a little snapshot of it here. For people who are doing these monthly check-ins, if they want an idea of somewhere to start the conversation, this is quite a good tool. It'll ask questions, not like, how are you and how's your well-being? Because we don't always get an honest answer to that. We don't trust it, perhaps. Or the other big problem is a lot of lawyers don't know. they don't know that they're on the path to burnout until they absolutely drop off the end of it. They don't know that they're suffering from chronic stress until something really serious happens. Maybe they're in the hospital having their heart checked because they think they're having a heart attack and they're told, no, it's just panic attacks. They don't know until they get there. So these sorts of questions ask things in a different way so that things can be picked up a lot sooner. So there's just some examples here. Am I clear about what's expected of me? Can I have autonomy over when I have a break? All of those sorts of things. There's many more, but these sorts of questions get to the root of, is there a problem or is there a problem brewing, rather than just asking, how's your mental health on a scale of 1 to 10, or how's your well-being, or how are you, etc. Because they either may not be honest or they may not even know. That's the problem that we're dealing with. What does training and support look like? So yes, you've got mental health and wellbeing awareness type things. Those are all over the place. There is much awareness. What there is not is practical application. How do I take all of this that is on YouTube, is in webinars, is in books? How do I practically apply it? Particularly if I'm someone who's already quite stressed, doesn't have any time, only prioritizes client work and deadlines, and cannot lift my head up to see the bigger picture. How on earth do I start getting to the gym at lunchtime and eating healthy food and planning my meals? I mean, it's impossible at that stage to expect people to be able to do that. So what are the tools that they need to be able to help them to implement some of this great stuff that's out there, but not immediately implementable? So coping tools, skills trainings, those sorts of things. Mental health first aiders definitely have a part to play, although the question is always who is supporting them. There needs to be some sort of line of support for the mental health first aiders. And then support and network groups, peer groups. These are really, really important, because not only are they a safe place for people to go and talk about how they feel, but they tackle the stigma, because all of this internalizing that we tend to do about how, well, everyone else can cope with the pressure. It's just me who's a failure. It's me who's not strong enough. It's me who's not able to stay in this profession any longer, etc., etc. I've had those thoughts many times. When we actually go to those support groups and have other people say the same thing, it's like, I'm not alone. I'm not a failure. It's not just me. Other people feel like this. So that's okay then. Okay, so now what do we do? What do we do next? What are they doing? What have they found useful? Because if it's all right for them, it must be all right for me. So support groups are really, really super valuable, I think. So there we go. Based on what we've talked about there, it's good for you to think about what you might take away from that. What actions might you take as a result of some of this? Maybe there's things that have already been on your mind, but they keep being pushed away because of other things. What is your priority? What are the first steps? Because I think with anything like this, and I always say it in any training, there's lots of information, but to take it away and not do anything with it is always a shame. It's always even if we just take one tiny step, one tiny action, then things change. That's the point. From tiny little steps, it's 12 months down the line, we see big changes. So I think that's it's really important to think about what you want to take away and what you might want to do differently. So if there are any questions, comments, thoughts, anything like that, any of this that you are putting into practice and you've seen work well, or other things you've seen work well, it would be great to hear from you. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Amy and Ross, you've sat there so patiently listening to everything. I will stop recording as well. If you do have any thoughts, comments, or questions,